think we're having hotspot troubles. I wonder if this reconnected. All right, I gotta play with this. Come on up. We asked Jake and Julia to go do some runs for us. And let's see, no, others. Okay. Mona. Have the shot
Together.
Whatever works for you. We asked you to do some runs to see if we floated the income and the house values or anything, if we could maybe move that percentage of people covered by income sensitivity up about 64%. And Jake, I think you said you had the ability to run it. More or less. Yeah, come on up, tell us what you found out.
Getting a nicer chair today. Good afternoon, Superintendent Julia Richard, my fiscal office.
Jake Feldman, Tax Department.
So, so big picture, I believe this is in follow-up to committee discussion from the last week or two, talking about changes to the different aspects of the property tax credit system. So we're calling that that's the income threshold and the house site value. We do have some modeling that was presented to the committee last year that was really getting just at this question. And I know that, I don't know if Jake, if you have anything you want to talk about big picture before diving into going through that table?
Sure. I think one detail, and I don't have any prepared testimony today to post. I just wanted to mention it because I think it's important. A part of the property tax credit system that sometimes gets overlooked is that just because you're low income doesn't mean you get a property tax credit. Right. You only get a property tax credit if your taxes based on property exceed your taxes based on income. And there are about 15,000 homesteads for whom that is not the case. So they send us all the paperwork, they've got the low income, they don't get a credit because they're in a situation where they are relatively high income relative to their property value. So for example, this year, in an average town, if you're in a house and your household makes 60,000 of income and your house is worth $100,000, you're not going to get a credit. So again, there's 15,000 of those per year. So if the question is about how many homesteads are eligible, that's actually a bigger number than the homesteads who actually get a credit by about 10%.
Shoddy, I can't. And it's this rule. I got emails up till 10 o'clock this morning. Okay, we think we have a dead spot in this room.
I confess.
So anyway.
So about 10% of homesteads are actually eligible, but they don't actually get a credit because the math doesn't work out. There's also some other more minor reasons why you might not get credit. If you write on your form that you plan to sell your house, you don't get a credit. If you're actually somebody else's dependent, that excludes you. If you didn't live in Vermont in the prior year, you don't get a credit. Right? So the world of eligible households is actually at least 10% bigger than the households actually get.
Realize we asked if you plan to sell your house, you didn't, because one of the most annoying things as a realtor was to prorate the credit to the seller who was moving to Florida and charge it to the buyer. And that was standard practice.
I think it's actually, the question was actually if you plan to sell your house before April 1st. Then it's actually the new household, I think.
Yeah, that, it's who owns it on March, 31st.
Well, what happens if you don't declare that you plan to sell it and you do sell it? Is there some sort of a way to recapture? What does the state do?
If you don't, yes, you can withdraw your homestead. You're supposed to withdraw your homestead declaration, I think, in that circumstance.
But suppose you don't.
The practice is we prorate what's left of that credit, and the buyer pays it to the seller, and then the buyer pays the lower tax rate for the rest of the year until next April, when officially on the tax rolls, the owner of record is the buyer that bought it in June the year before.
So does that mean that somebody for that tax year then benefits because?
And the theory was, when we did it, that you were buying another house in Vermont and it was based on your income, and you therefore should have the money to help you pay your taxes on your new house. But on more than one occasion, that money has gone out of state that I was personally involved in. And
Well, I would
the
assume that-
realtors have tried, we tried in here, thought we had a fix the first year, somewhere like midnight, and we have never found a fix to that issue.
The dilemma is in the first year you buy your house, the first April 1st, your house is appraised. And there was no mechanism to involve you in the school funding system. And you received it the next year, which meant when you sold your home, you would then get the benefit of it a year behind, year after year after year. That was the year you got it back, and if you moved out of state, that's when you got your benefit.
So anyway, it's gone, but that's the way it is.
So would you say there are three levers that we have, maybe probably more than that, but three that I think are circling around in your modeling? One is the income amount, which is the 90,000 up to 230. Then there's the 2% of income. So what 2% of your income is, that should, your property taxes, if it exceeds 2% of your income, that's where it starts getting income sensitized.
So I would say that if I understand your question, when thinking about the property tax credit and these different levers that you're talking about. So one is your household income. So as you correctly mentioned, that's that 90,000. Another is the house site value. So that is what value of your house site can you compare what you would pay on income to what you would pay on property tax. So if it's below 90,000, it's that 400,000 of the house site value cap. If you're above 90,000, it's 225,000. That 2% that you're talking about right there, that's the base rate. That's the base income rate. So you think about the homestead property tax, it's a base rate of $1. So with the local adjustment, right, the homestead property tax is based on those local spending decisions, local education spending for equalized pupil. Goes up if you spend more. But if you spend less than the yield, it still is going to be $1. It's never going to go below $1. That's the base rate. And then the same is true when we're calculating it on income. The base rate is 2%. So your locally adjusted income rate is never going to be below 2%. It could just be higher if your school district votes higher education spending per equalized pupil.
Which all school districts
Correct,
do.
yes.
All school districts spend higher. And when you spend higher, your income charge, it goes up by the same percent as the property tax charge.
So Senator McDonald's questions have been around the 90,000 threshold, is that correct?
I've heard a number of questions being floated around in this room. I think that there's the question of the income threshold of that 90,000, which you just mentioned. Also, the house site value cap is something that the committee was talking about with folks from Stowe, I believe, a couple weeks ago. And it is a policy decision if you want to look into one of those, if you want to look into both of those, if you want to adjust the base rate. That's also, all of these are policy decisions.
I think the base question is, not we were at 80% of people who get access to it. More recent things we've had, we've been in the 70s, but it's dropped to 64. So the theory was you wanted to have the majority of people covered under this because then it's a lot. It's not, you can't, it's harder to monkey with something that most people will get hurt if you monkey with it. And there's value to that. Because this was to be a broad-based plan. And I think the first question is, why has it dropped fairly rapidly from the low 70s to, the high low 60s? And I don't think we'll know what that does to property tax bills until they go out to the CLAs and we're looking at them too, so.
I think I'll let Jake jump in. I do just want to add one bit. I did go back and try to do some research and see what percentage have been covered by the property tax adjustment over time. And I wasn't able to, in time for today's testimony, go back prior to 2005. The highest, I believe, was 72%, which was in sometime in the 2010s.
And that's, when did we go to 90,000, Senator? In income, we started 75.
You weren't in,
I don't think I was here then.
so that puts it in a 4-year window.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, so my hunch was we never hit 80. When we did the bill, we really thought we were going. But it's a complex bill and what works out in reality is not always what we think. But even if the high was 74, you drop 10%, and I think that's, the question is it just the rapid increase in house values? Have incomes gone up, and not just but I think wealth more than, incomes going up and cost of living, they're out there. But I guess we're just asking what's going on, what's causing it.
The district has this chart here that has the percentages of folks who are eligible for the adjustment dating back to 2006.
Yeah, and to clarify, I think this is a really important and interesting distinction that Jake started out with when thinking about the percentage eligible versus the percentage receiving. So the table that I put together for you, Senator McDonald, and I can share with the committee if that would be helpful, was the percentage receiving. So how many households received a property tax adjustment, and what was the total question of households? This isn't capturing how many households had incomes that would have made them eligible, and it turns out it was cheaper for them to pay on property than it were to pay. So we're kind of talking about two distinct questions. One is how many are eligible.
Right.
That's the higher number, and then the other is how many are receiving, and that will be the lower number.
And they're either they're receiving, not receiving, either because they don't apply, or because it's costs less to, go on your house value. But this swings over into the miscellaneous tax where we're being asked to tell the clerks to put a broadside in plain English explaining the property tax rebate system, but I don't. And I'm just wondering, and I heard this came from legal aid, if they were looking at who's eligible and who receives, they may be going to the assumption that that difference is caused by lack of knowledge and not factoring in that for some people, it's just more advantageous to do it. And some people might not even file income tax. I mean, when we did this study this summer, is it 17,000 that pay based on their property value and 70 that don't pay income tax, or am I mixing those up or completely wrong?
Well, that was me, so I should know. When I looked at it just now, or this morning, based on the most recent filings, I saw about 15,000 homesteads that do declare, they do all the paperwork, but they don't get a credit. So that means we did the math for them, and they're better off paying based on property. So that number is 15,000, most recent.
You do that?
Would those be mobile homes?
They could be low, yeah, definitely lower value. It's a lower value property with a relatively higher value income. That's the
Some
situation.
people stay in the old family home as their incomes go up, and they don't necessarily move up to a McMansion when their incomes go up. That's the home they were brought up in, or some of those may be fairly humble homes. And that's fine. They're paying on their property. Okay.
When we started, it was a $15,000 homestead exemption, which helped rural homeowners with a house 2 acres. You have places like Chelsea, where the claim was that houses were being overpriced because they were paying more than they were worth.
Oh, well, we always claim that.
Well, it was an interesting expression.
But as I said, I did tax appraisals. I never saw so many people bad mouthing their houses. But I also, during COVID, toured the kingdom, and there is a lot. You don't have to go very far to find some really poor housing that makes a single wide look pretty luxurious. It's up there. So, okay. So we've got 10,000 people that it's advantageous for them not to pay on their income. But I assume that number is probably staying relatively stable.
Yeah, the reason I bring up that number is just to make sure that the committee knows the percentage eligible is about 10% higher than the percentage receiving. So if you look at a year and 72% actually got a credit, you can infer that about 82% were actually eligible based on their income. And I don't know the intent of Act 60 because I was just starting college at that time and not paying any attention to
You were
this.
in college?
But so I'm just pointing that out, that it's different between receiving and eligible of about 10%.
But receiving has dropped to 64, and if you've been able to figure out, is that merely that the house values have gone up, or they've
I think, and this is not intended to be opaque. It's more of a question of, I think it depends on there's a lot of circumstances going on, right? It's that relationship between a household's income and a household's property value that determines whether or not they receive a property tax credit.
Right.
On the aggregate, I don't know why. I don't know if we can point to one specific reason. There's a lot of factors at play. I don't know if
Yeah, so the point where eligibility ends, that upper income is not in law. It's actually something that tax and JFO have to calculate. And it's just kind of imagining like where two lines meet. And that has come in a little bit in the past few years because of the yields. So if that income eligibility is coming in a little bit, while people's incomes are growing out, then that would cause the numbers receiving credits to go down a little bit, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
What's coming in?
So this year, when you do your homestead declaration, the property tax credit claims will say for household income up to 134,800. But a few years ago, it was for household income up to 137,000. So that upper threshold is coming in, like declining, while people's incomes are getting bigger.
Okay.
Thereby resulting in
Fewer households
paying based on.
getting a credit. Yeah,
Because their incomes are going up.
that's probably part of it.
Okay, so that gets back to, is that because they're wealthier, or has the cost, I think if we did a cost of living, we might find out, they're not necessarily wealthier because in buying power, because their income has gone up, because inflation has definitely gone up. So my credit is, what did we base the 80%, was it 80% of all Vermonters? Was it the 80th percentile of income? What was 80% of what? Was it just all Vermonters? Or was it, up to the 80th percentile in income, or, 180% of the poverty level? Because that, if you had a number that floated with the economics, you'd have something to hang your hat on. And I don't know what.
Well, if
where that
you
number-
ask me, I would say the $75,000 was picked because it represented 80% of income taxpayers. Castle Denham doesn't have that recollection. I haven't gotten a hold of Paul Sillo. I haven't spoken to Rivers, Senator Rivers. So it's just, that was my remembrance.
Yeah.
It's
I mean, I
only what
think-
I'm certain about.
Because that's the original post. If it's just 80% of the people, depending on how the population grows, either in rich or poor people, you could have a very different outcome. If it's 80% of the median income, or 80%, I think it's probably the 80th percentile of income.
Yeah.
But,
That's fine.
yeah, so if it's the 80th percentile, then if we looked at where that is right now, that might give us something to look at. I've already been told that the House won't have time to take anything we do up, so this discussion is going to have to hang over till next year. I intend to tell them the same thing about changes to veggie, which apparently they are sending, I think it's coming back to us on the Barry Tiff bill, which is well decorated this year and has not come
I'm
out.
worried about that, Chair. So if we can't do anything about it until next year, it takes a little lead time
Right,
to make a change in this next year. don't do anything. He didn't account for the meantime, we'll be back in the same.
That's why we're here.
Yep.
So,
Senator McDonald, why I opened my perspective on this, that the policy intent of Act 60 was to have approximately 80% of our homeowners at the income sensitized. And we slipped on that, and I think we slipped on it in my naive understanding of this very complicated tax code, is because incomes have gone up. And I'm looking at census data, and you can clearly see the median household income in Vermont is going higher. So it seems, tell me if it's too naive to think this, but it's been 90,000 for a while, and we've gone through years of inflation, and salaries have been increasing. If we want to get 80% of the households to get income sensitization, so that we're not having the wealthiest individuals not subsidized or not paying a fair share
The share
for
they
large,
used to pay.
the share they used to pay, then that $90,000, I don't want to affect this year's yield, this year's budget, or so on. But how do we set in motion, since it's self-stabilizing, to have that 90,000 be increased somewhat to where it should have been if it had been auto-adjusting based on some widely agreed upon or accepted economic indicators? What should that 90,000 be if we were to adjust it for? Am I making sense?
no, yeah, I
Is
think,
that what you're modeling?
Yeah, Julia and Deb Wright from JFO did some great modeling on this already, which she has.
well,
Just so you know, the 90,000, that threshold, if you moved it, it would have no impact on the number of households getting the credit. That's the point in the system where credit goes from covering up to $400,000 of property value, it drops down to 225. The point,
Because that's where we did some tinkering.
well, that was the last tinkering we did.
Yeah.
I think the original house value was 100,000.
it's actually, it's actually that other point, like the thing that's at the top of the form that I was just talking about, that's where if that number was higher, you would end up catching up more households into the system.
What number?
It's the 134,800. That's that point that JFO and tax has to calculate where it's the top of eligibility.
How do they calculate that? Sorry.
Okay,
Bunch of
now,
algebra.
this was done when I wasn't here, so this is
I'm
helpful.
happy to sit down and show
Okay,
you how we solve for it. Essentially, we set equations equal to each other and then solve it so that we can see with the yields that are being considered what that break-even point would be. It's
This was
weedy,
done-
but I would be very happy to sit down with you offline and walk through the steps of how we solve
I
that.
think that might be helpful, because this was done when I wasn't here, when I left 4 years. We were still, every year, we argued with the House about raising the house value or raising the income value, and I think, so it sounds like,
Usually taxpayers.
yeah,
And-
we at some point did dual equations and saw where they met.
So just to clarify, this point, this 134,800, that is put on the tax and says, okay, if income's eligible, up to this income will be eligible. It's solely a math exercise. We look at the yields, the income yields, we look at the property yields. There's no assumptions, no policy decision, nothing. We just say, okay, based on these yields and based on the way that the funding formula works, we can solve for at what point a household would never be eligible for the property tax credit. And that's why it changes every year and why it's not set in statute, because it depends on what the household yield is, or the homestead property yield is, and what the income yield is.
Okay, yes, things have changed.
I think the avenue to prepare to look at it is the December 1st letter. And if I may go into the reason the December 1st letter came about was when Act 60 passed, the law said the tax rate's $1.10, 2% on income before you vote your local increases. And what happened with Governor Dean and then Governor Douglas, both governors, what they would do is take a look at the house appraisals and they would say, oh my goodness, the house appraisals are going up and the $1.10 brings in a lot more money than we, as governor, had expected. And we would sit here in this committee and go, holy mackerel, that $1.10 is bringing in more money than we expected. And the Act 60 also said that there would be the general fund would contribute the same amount it did in the previous year, plus a increase that was tied to a cost of living that people generally agreed was reflective of the changes. And both those governors, before we showed up, said, my goodness, the $1.10 is bringing in more money than we ever expected. We will reduce the general fund's contribution to the ed fund by the amount of extra money that the $1.10 is generating, which was, for each year that happened, a increase in the amount of school spending that was paid for by property taxes instead of by general fund taxes. So we passed in this committee and we said, on the 1st of December, before governors made their budgets, that the tax commissioner, with consultation with the Secretary of Education and the Secretary of Administration, will publish a letter that says what the tax rate would be if there were no changes in statute, which had the effect of setting an expectation on the 1st of December so that governors couldn't grab a couple of million here and there in the open market and put it in their pocket. And we halted that behavior. The December 1 letter, if we were told, if it were to say what the tax rate would have to be to, I can't imagine this. I can't imagine it would be so persuasive as to have it say what the tax rate would have to be if 80% of the people paid their school taxes based on their incomes the way they did, like the way I, Mark McDonald, claimed they did 80 years ago without Kathleen and
Okay,
others to back it up. That would be one way to set an expectation. But there are other ways to set expectations,
Okay.
I'm sure. I'm just giving this example.
It is, but I learned something new today. I mean, to start with, you weren't here. This was a bill that was born of distrust. We took over the town's one taxing source. We had a history of not funding the foundation, and the towns were terrified that we would do exactly what said. We would rob it. When I came in, I had to swear I would not steal from the transportation fund. The transportation fund was so flush that we stole from it.
It was petty theft.
It was, anyway, I wouldn't do that, but, and now we see where the transportation fund is. And I wasn't here, and I can see Janet Ansell's fine hand in this, and Tim Ashes made a change so that rather coming out of every year we had a committee of conference and the Senate wanted to raise the House to 250 and the income here and and every year the House would say, no, that's raising tax rates, and it would, just be painful but predictable committee of conference. That we set up a ratio of a couple of equations and ratios so that it self-adjusts. Is that what we're doing as income levels and house values, that your formulas, and you're way above my math, credibility, that we are now automatically adjusting for these factors? And you can see where they cross.
Well, Bill Tell used to
I
these numbers. He
know,
said
yes.
there's a number in every formula that when you monkey with it, changes everything.
Yes.
And
Oh,
if we collectively were able to identify that number and say, on December 1st, if the number were the same as it was, if that K factor was the same as it was last year, this is what you would get. Then we would know, then we'd have a view of it.
I think,
I don't know what the craft, sure.
well, I
the
think that's
place
what, I think,
where it has
I
to be
think
crafted.
because we're all above our pay grade when it comes to mathematical equations.
So
Most of this, maybe not Senator
Yeah,
Shitten
it'll be
or
B
Senator,
plus,
but, I mean, my first question is, what is the 80th percentile of wages? I mean, if that's way off, and what is the distribution? And we didn't do that, did we, last? We didn't do any, did we do an income distribution? In all of those charts and graphs?
in the summer study committee,
Yeah.
I can't recall off the top of my head.
I don't.
But I think that the committee was really interested in looking at, adjusting those thresholds
Yes,
and what that would do.
we did look at adjusting the thresholds up to, was it 300,000?
I'm not sure. I do have a table that I could put up so we could have some
Okay,
numbers to
yeah.
talk through, if that would be helpful.
That would be helpful.
Not actually that table, a different table.
Similar type of things.
Actually,
No.
I think it might even get to your question even more.
Or just similar tables that
Yeah,
we would
yeah.
try and recognize their differences and their commonalities.
I mean, we did, the first thing we looked at was just moving income sensitivity and house value up. Now, we were looking for something different. We were looking for a more gradual slope so that folks on the upper end paid the same percentage of their income as folks, and we didn't get that. We got a really steep right climb, if I'm remembering that one.
Yeah, so the income summer study committee was looking at targeting a couple of different places in that slope, if you want to call it, of the percentage of education taxes as a portion of income. And so what I have here is actually modeling that we did present to the committee last year when the committee was taking up a similar conversation about what potential changes would be and what they would look like for the property tax adjustment. So I thought that this might be helpful to just have an idea of what the scale of the numbers that we're looking at. There's a lot of caveats associated with the modeling based on the data that we're using, the data that's available, given the fact that not everyone, if you're not ever going to be eligible for a property tax credit, you're not going to be filling out the property tax credit paperwork. So Jake works his magic of combining data sets to help Deb do this modeling. Do you want to feel free to chime in whenever?
Sure. I mean, I could just say that we provided, so Deb Brighton needed to know for homesteads who don't file for credits, what's their income. So we did a matching exercise to try to get a sense of what their income is, where we used their AGI, which is sometimes close to household income.
Yeah.
And that's how she was able to produce this.
So,
Send it to me.
So the 6.5 million additional cost, I believe Senator Kitchell the other day used the term that the ed fund is self-stabilizing. So my question is I know we're not going to invest it this year, but to Senator McDonald's point, would it be prudent for us to consider language that would charge your office for the December letter to target to self-stabilize the calculation so that the percentage of homeowners receiving a property tax adjustment, raising that upper threshold, the 132, whatever, to hit approximately 80%? Is that what you're circling around?
Well, that would be straightforwardly putting a thumb on a scale.
But isn't that what we originally did?
Well, that's what I'd like to do, but
I think we've.
that's me, and I was trying to.
I think we've heard that we have never hit 80% in recorded history, that the best we ever hit was around 74. And so to keep talking about 80% is going someplace we have never been.
But would that additional cost disappear if in your calculations we self-balance?
So yeah, so let me just quickly walk us through what we're looking at here so that we can understand what the 6.5 million or the 19 million, what that's referring to. So what we're really looking at here is a number of different modeling scenarios because the committee has stated different ideas. So this is a way to sort of compare and contrast some of the things that have been talked about. So just looking, keep in mind this is modeling from last year. So this is reflecting 2022. That being said, all of the takeaways are very similar. So we're looking at the same scale. So we've got the income threshold of 90,000, right? Below 90,000 income, households can apply for the property tax credit up to 400,000 of their house site value. If they're above 90,000, it's up to 225,000 of their house site value.
More than 90,000 a year.
So if you're making,
Okay, but less than 135.
yeah, so if you're making $90,001,
Yeah,
you can use the property tax adjustment up to the 225,000 on your house site value. If you're
Okay.
making 89,999, you can use it up to the 400,000.
okay.
Which is how we got a slope.
Yes, yeah, I remember we did this for slowly because it was a cliff. Okay.
So then that break even point that we calculate is 135,000. So households with an income higher than that will never be eligible for the property tax credit. Their household income is too high under the yields that are set here and the thresholds that are set here to qualify for a property tax adjustment. So with all of these assumptions, it was 63% we were estimating of homeowners would receive a property tax adjustment. So then Deb Brighton and I worked on thinking about what potential adjustments would be. These are in no way policy proposals, just thinking through different scenarios. So say you increased everything by 5%. So you move the income threshold up to 95,000.
Yes, all right.
The household value from 400 up to 420,000. House site value above 95,000 of income to 236,000. There'd be a higher eligibility.
Yeah,
About 1% more homeowners we estimate would receive a property tax adjustment. Because more property tax owners would receive a property tax adjustment, that's an increase in a tax expenditure. So increasing those thresholds would be an increase in the property tax credit expenditure of 6.5 million. And so to get to your question, Senator Chittenden, what does that 6.5 million means? Because the ed fund is self-balancing, it means that somewhere, somehow, that $6.5 million needs to be raised or expenditures need to be cut.
okay.
And so if that,
And it does not automatically go to the higher incomes.
so that's gonna shake out over all, if it's baked into, if that cost, if the yields are calculated to pick up that cost, that means that that cost is going to be picked up by all property taxpayers.
Okay.
So there's going to be the folks who could be receiving a higher property tax credit.
It's be picked up by all property taxpayers or all local education taxpayers.
Unless I was asked to model otherwise, I would say all property taxpayers because
Can we just
non-homestead
see
and
that
homestead are adjusted.
Property tax in general is the local education tax when you're not figuring municipal taxes.
But I'm talking about the statewide education tax, so
Right.
that's the non-homestead and the homestead.
Yes, so this is, when we say property tax here, it means local education tax, okay?
And the non-homestead tax.
And then, yes,
So the locally adjusted homestead property tax rate and then the uniform
it's
non-homestead.
It's a school.
Yeah, the school tax.
Okay.
Yeah. So this means, for instance, in this scenario, this means that some folks would be paying higher property taxes to cover this additional tax expenditure, and others would be receiving an increased property tax credit. Those who would be paying more in this example, higher property tax, statewide education property taxes.
Local education tax.
Okay, just let her say property
Okay,
taxes.
okay. I
Local
wasn't trying- I
seated
wasn't-
I want to hear what she's gonna say.
Higher
Because
local
we've got 4
education property taxes. This means that households that were already fully paying on income prior to this change would see an increase in their property tax liability because they would need to pick it up. That means their tax bill would go up.
Okay, so that's what we call it, but it's not just the wealthy
It's also going to be the folks on the other end.
on the other end. That whose income is so low, it's cheaper to pay it.
So that's gonna be, yeah, households who have incomes below 90,000 and households below 400,000. That's an example of a household that's going to be seeing an increase.
Which is what you were trying to tell us last week.
Yeah.
And that did not compute with the simplicity that when the system went into effect, we thought we had, but then when we actually do the math, because all the numbers don't move together for everyone, that if we move, yeah, so the folks that were being covered before, if we raise the level, they in fact are going to pay more in order to float all boats the same in whatever that, the folks under that cap. If we raise that cap and it costs more money, then it's gonna get spread out.
And so,
through
and
everyone.
And so too, with those who are above, who are no
Yes.
longer, who are, have too high of a household income to be eligible, they too will see an increase in property tax liability. So this is completely a policy decision, and it's just thinking about, how the property tax liability shakes out across income distribution and house site value distribution within the system.
You share this with the committee?
I have not, but I could happily.
Because I'll,
Would you like me to put it up
I
on
will
my?
ask, I'll save my question until this has been shared.
Would you like me to put it on my screen, on the screen, so everyone can look at it?
Yeah. I don't think we're gonna take a half hour with Becky Wasserman to go over the bond bank language. But we may need extra time on the bottle bill, and I have a money chairs meeting at 4:30.
All right, so this is the document that Senator McDonald,
Okay.
If you can make it bigger and show the last half of that chart.
sure,
What-
so
I'm not
I'll
trying to
make,
skew the results.
Transpose it, it'd be easier to see on the
I can read that.
okay, so this is the year, right? And then this is the percentage of households that are receiving a property tax credit,
Who pay based on income?
who are receiving, yes, are receiving some sort of property tax credit. So it could be that they are also paying a portion on property if their property is higher than the house site value.
May we assume that this number is the 64 that you said we're currently 64%?
The 63 in the earlier table was an estimate from last year, and the most recent data is 65%.
Okay,
Well then, okay.
so we are not seeing huge fluctuation.
So in the last 3 years of the chart,
Yeah,
the 70, we've seen 70 back here before and 72. In the last 3 years of the chart, demographically or whatever, who have been the winners and who have been the losers during this time here? Who's paid more than they used to pay compared to others who have paid more than they used to pay, but not as much more?
I think, isn't that dependent on every individual? I mean, housing value has gone up. I don't know that that's reflected in there yet.
Well, theoretically, then you pay more in taxes, in
property taxes.
Well, we also do rolling averages and CLA, so,
When this happens, some people are better off and some are not as well.
yes.
I have my opinions, but could someone come up with something that's mathematically is able to ascribe the better offness of the some and the worse offness of the others?
I don't know the answer, Senator, but I could say this. As you get towards the very end of income eligibility, which is $135,000 roughly, the credits get very small. That's kind of, Julie and I are
Yeah,
calculating like the
$10.
point where they turn to zero. So that's one piece of important information. So it's not like if you're at $133,000 of income, you're gonna get a $2,000 credit. You're not. It's probably gonna be $20. The other thing to know is that for the most part, households over $90,000 of income don't benefit from income sensitivity. And what I mean by that is they would be better off if there was no income sensitivity at all, because homestead tax rates would be about 40 cents lower. So if you actually run the numbers for the $25,000 household, 25,000 households with income over $90,000 who get a credit, only about 10% are benefiting from that credit. The other 90% would be better if there was no income sensitivity at all. So the question of who pays in the system is complicated.
Could they be better because poorer people would be paying a lot more?
Poorer people would be paying more. People, if there was no income sensitivity system, the people with very low income, very large property values, they would be harmed. They would be paying more, right?
But people with very low incomes, below 47,000, are covered under the super circuit breaker, so they are already limited to a percentage of their income for not just state, but local taxes. And local taxes are not income sensitized, and some towns, one neighboring this one, has traditionally had higher municipal than school taxes. So, and some of, it's generally the small cities that run a fair amount of services. You have a significant municipal tax that's also coming out as your tax.
Since it's self-balancing, income sensitization is just pushing that cost off of the poor people onto wealthier people. Which
Not
is
all
intended.
poor, because if you are poor and or if you're wealthy and have a low value house, wealthy being $80,000 a year, you have a low value house, then you're better off, you're paying on your property. If you are retired and making $80,000 a year, but your house has gone up 200% in value since you bought it, you may be paying more based on it. You need to pay in your income, but you're also, I think, and that was the concern we're hearing from Stowe, is if the house was worth 300,000 last year and 600,000 this year, what's going to happen to those people's property bill? And they couldn't figure it out. But, is it going up $50 or is it going up $500? And none of us knows what the breaking point is, but I don't think any of us, when we started the summer study, which I have trouble with because we didn't start till September, and we crammed it in November, December, that this is a much more complex system than we were mathematically complex than we were used to thinking of it as, and that there are we tried every simple solution, and we really want to get people with higher incomes to pay more or to pay it all, and it just.
We got them to pay what we got them to pay.
Yeah, but I mean, this last
So,
year.
Compared to what we got them to pay 10 years ago, and what's happened in the last 10 years, have that group of people that we got to pay more done better or worse in that last 10-year period than the folks below that?
I don't know right now.
Who does?
I don't know that anyone does.
I don't know. I haven't done that analysis. I don't know.
If you could do that analysis, because I think it's having to try and figure out how to make that analysis that is the most challenging task. And this is no reflection on Ms. Richter, who's been a fast learner and open to learning more. So but
Thank you.
there are people who have flown aircraft in this atmosphere before, who knew how to make those analyses, and some have retired and some are hard to get a hold of. And
But analysis that were done 20 years ago based on assumptions can be made. I would suggest that you read the report that came out, because the whole goal of that summer study was to have people, wealthy people, depending on how you define wealthy, but doing this on an income tax, so everybody paid based on their income. And we've done.
this was last summer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so read that, because we went through, which is essentially what you want. You want to make sure that people with higher incomes are paying the same percentage of the property tax bills that they did in 2000.
Yeah, I'm also curious if we made the switch, how you would do it, but I would, Madam Chair,
Well, that's-
repeat that, because that's exactly what I want to know.
Okay, and I don't know that we have that number, but that's you need to know that there's a problem and how much of a problem before we try and find a solution.
Maybe we could ask the December 1st letter to share the answer to that question, and then have between now and then to,
Since this
Figure out how to do it.
legislature is not going, I'm not gonna ask the December 1st letter to share anything until I know what it is and if it will help or just spread confusion amongst the rank and file.
I'm willing to
Maybe
learn what
have
it
it put on the
shows.
back of the ballot
Okay.
along with.
Yeah.
Gathering the data for the December 1st letter is a challenge that involves the tax department, JFO, and the Agency of Education, and that in it of itself is a massive
Yeah.
analysis project.
But it helps us to locate ourselves on the map of where we are.
Well, this question that you're asking, Julie and I can talk about it and see if we can think of something, during the session.
Certainly. We're not saying no.
Right.
We're just saying
Hard
right now,
question.
we don't have the answer. It's a huge, complex question that we'll need to dig into more before we can consider.
And I have a feeling when we started out, we may have gotten some simpler answers than as we've gotten deep into the weeds.
We had the people who built the machine who,
Maybe you could find one of those mechanics and talk to them.
I've tried to get a hold of. I've spoken with Catherine, and I haven't spoken to Silo.
I would
And I
talk
haven't
to
spoken
the
to
theorists
the,
that were here when they did.
The marine surveyor to build help. So
I'm very interested in this topic and I'd love to come back to it next year. I'm just sensing. that
We,
we're out of
I
time now.
guarantee you we'll be back to it next year.
well, we get,
And the year after
The
that.
year after that, the year after that, you're right.
My point is, we're gonna
if
be glad.
Silo and Talbot and Brighton are in coffins next year,
Okay,
well, it's.
yeah. Okay,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
thank you. Thank you for your patience and your diligence. And I think we finally got into one question. I tried that.
I do.
Come on.
I'd be happy to.
I think it may have gone back. It asked me for the
Mind if I-
No, play with it.
a little solving technical
You
problems.
wanna answer all my emails? Go right ahead.
No, no, no.
Okay. That's fine. Go. Okay. Becky, you're gonna have an easier time with this. Because none of us understand the bond bank, so we aren't gonna be really asking about these questions. Maybe Randy understands them.
So we should move to that two-line income tax form. It'd be much simpler than this. Line one, annual adjusted gross income. Line two, pay the amount on line one.
I was just gonna say pay 50%
We're
of.
close to that now.
I thought Massachusetts, Massachusetts has a flat tax.
Flat 5%. It's very easy.
We have lower taxes, $300,000 a household.
Okay, okay.
Massachusetts does, as income taxes.
We're going, this is the miscellaneous tax bill, which we really do need to get out of here like Tuesday. We're gonna add the bond bank language, which would allow the bond bank to make shorter than 20-year term loans to municipalities and school districts. We had the gentleman from the bond bank in. He sent over his language. Becky has put it into our language, and that's there. And I think you got it on?
I think so, you tell me. There was a setting that changed and it seemed like it sent emails as soon as I did.
That's, well, it came on, okay, because I got the same message I got yesterday that Safari wasn't working, or right, yeah, it wasn't working, so it's working now. Good, I'm having continual, we think we've got a dead spotter in our hot spot.
This was a setting.
So anyway, so we have that language, I'm assuming it's online.
Yes, it is posted to the committee's webpage for today.
All right, there you are, you tell. Okay. Okay, why don't you go over that with us? Anyway, the other big issue we have on the miscellaneous tax is requiring the clerk to put in plain English an explanation of the property tax credits. And I think from what we just heard, we might assume that it's not because people don't understand, it's because they aren't eligible. I'm trying to get legal aid to come in and tell us what numbers they were looking at and what they were trying to accomplish with that language. But this is this, so let's go.
Becky Wasserman, Legislative Counsel. So as you just mentioned, this language came over from the bond bank, and the context for it is, as I understand it, is that they are trying to expand their statutory authority to make it easier to get out some federal funds that
And there's the bond bank.
received to school districts and certain municipalities by offering different kinds of,
And I think there was federal money that was coming to
Yes.
them is what's.
I believe it was under the Inflation Reduction Act. but,
Yeah. They've got money.
So that is the motivation for the language change, and there are some other, I think, cleanup changes in here as well. So section 1 of the bill is amending the definitions used for the bond bank. So the definition of municipal bond, and I noticed there's actually an error here. There's some languages repeated, so I will have that cleaned up in the amendment. But it's expanding the definition of municipal bond to include In addition to bonds or notes or evidence of debt, it's including financing arrangements of a governmental unit, including a bond, note, or evidence of debt that constitutes a general obligation of a governmental unit. I think the bond bank can speak to why this language will help their situation, but that this is the proposal they have put forward. And there is a change to the definition of public body that is striking out that the public body may issue its bonds or notes. And then there's subdivision 11. I'll just go back. I think the name change is now the Vermont Bond Bank, and so some of the changes here are striking out municipal.
Right.
In subdivision 13, under the definition of revenue bond, it's adding in that reference to the financing arrangement of a government unit authorized under the laws of the state. And that would be payable from revenues derived from the finance asset, enterprise funds, or other specified revenues and earnings.
Okay, so this makes it, I think it's something broader than a revenue bond.
Right, I think it is, yeah, by referencing the financing arrangement, it is,
You'll pay us back in $10 increments with 3% interest or whatever.
yeah, it's a sort of an additional arrangement other than just bonds or notes of or other
Because
evidence.
bonds are 20 years and we now have money that would probably be more appropriate in shorter term financing arrangements. Okay.
The next few changes are just striking out municipal from the title of the bond bank, so that's in on page. Oh, I'm not seeing pages, that's awful. That's in the subdivision 14 and 15 for the definitions of revenue bond reserve fund and the definition of revenue fund. In section 2, the change there is also, this is the establishing section for the bond bank, and that's also just striking out municipal. Section 3, under the reports that are required by the bond bank, this is also striking out the reference to municipal. In the supplemental powers of the bank in section 4, so there's this language here that is sort of making that expansion again of the powers of the bank. So establishing terms and provisions with respect to any loan to governmental units through the purchase of municipal revenue bonds by the bank. Subdivision 10 allows the bank to, in addition to bonds or other forms of indebtedness, have those financing obligations or arrangements for projects that relate to renewable energy, energy efficiency, climate adaptation and projects that otherwise result in the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And I think these are the types of projects that this language is aiming to expand flexibility of financing.
And a lot of those would not be 20-year durations. Okay.
Section 5 is amending the waiver of defenses. So when there is an issuance of a municipal or revenue bond, that and the governmental unit that is supposed to pay, and there's a failure of that governmental unit to pay interest or principal on that bond, all defenses to non-payment are waived. And then there's additional language that says with respect to municipal bonds that constitute general obligation bonds supported by the full faith and credit of the municipality, that non-payment of those interest payments and principal payments, if funds are not available in the treasury of that governmental unit, the governing body is authorized to assess a tax on the grand list. And then the language that's added is sort of separating out when there's a failure to pay for municipal bonds that do not constitute a general obligation bond supported by the full faith and credit of the municipality. I think the bond bank can speak to why they need that change and differentiating those circumstances.
You do a bond, it's general obligation. This is a shorter term loan. As what I'm hearing is that what this says is the municipality or school district has the authority to issue a tax in order to pay off that unpaid. Michael, why don't you tell us what's happening here?
Yeah, sure. So this is a really helpful statutory provision that we have that is looked at by the rating agencies very favorably. It stands behind our AA+ rating. And whereas previously we could only purchase general obligation bonds or revenue bonds, the general obligation bond is the full faith and credit. So, implied in that is taxing authority. But now that we're introducing the ability to do other types of loans that are not supported by the general obligation, obviously we can't tie them to that same standard. So this section creates a distinction amongst sort of like remedies that we have when it's a general obligation versus when it's not a general obligation, or the alternative financing arrangement that we described.
Okay, so what are your remedies?
Yeah, so what we have, if it's a general obligation, we get,
I think it's that general obligation.
Yeah,
They
that's sort
have
of,
to raise the taxes and, yeah.
Yep.
What happens if it's not a general obligation? It's a 10-year loan.
Yep. Then we get, we can sort of call the note, so to speak, and add a penalty, which is the same authority that we have in the general obligation provision, as well as in, I guess, Chapter 120, which deals with our work with the State Revolving Loan Fund. We have similar authority there as well that parallels this provision.
So you can call the note and you can assess a penalty because they haven't paid it.
That's right.
All right, and then it's, okay, up to the legal system to enforce that?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
We don't have a whole lot of experience with that, fortunately, but
All right.
that's the presumption.
okay. Questions, anybody? All right.
So section 6 of the bill is dealing with the bond bank's general fund. So the bond bank maintains a general fund, and they deposit into that fund are fees received or charges made by the bank, and money received by the bank as payments of principal or interest on the municipal bonds. So this is amending subsection B, which is saying that the money in the general fund may also be used to be transferred to the bond bank's reserve fund to be used for the payment of principal or interest on bonds. And then the language that's added here, it goes on to say, any money in the general fund can also be used to make loans to governmental units under this chapter. So it's sort of expanding the use of that general fund for these.
And this is the state general fund.
No, this is the bond bank.
This is the bond banks, okay. New definition of general fund. All right, so they have a general fund, they budget out of that. They get interest payments from bonds and loans that goes into there. This says they can also use that money in their general fund to make loans. Okay.
And then in section 7, there is a revenue fund for the bond bank, so it's not the statewide revenue fund. And so this says that there's a number of things that are deposited into that revenue fund, and what this is speaking to in subdivision 3 is money received by the bank as payments of principal or interest on municipal or revenue bonds purchased by the bank or received as proceeds of the sale of bonds or investment obligations of the bank, or otherwise in repayments of loans made by the bank. So it's sort of expanding it to add in the repayments for these new financing arrangements.
They have a general fund now and a revenue fund. So what we're saying is they can use their general fund to make loans if they want to. But when the loans get paid back, that money, this now authorizes that to go into the revenue fund, which is where the present bond payments go.
I think there's, I think maybe the bond bank can answer that distinction. I think the revenue fund is perhaps specific to the revenue bonds, but the general fund is for other
Okay,
obligations.
so you have a revenue fund for revenue bonds. This would put the money you got in repayment for loans into the same fund as the money you get in repayment for revenue bonds, is that?
Yeah, we have a separate, under a legal separate fund, although it's not really an accounting separate fund, that would allow us to do alternative, these types of loans we've been talking about that are revenue bonds otherwise. So it's just a parallel to the general fund, sort of, just making sure that we carry through the authority for each one of the types of users that we deal with.
Since I'm gonna be recording this, I'm gonna need a little bit more help. All right. Okay.
So section 8 of the bill talks about the appointment of a trustee when there's a default. So if there's an action to enforce the rights of note holders or bond holders, to require the bank to collect rates, charges, or other fees, and to collect interest payments. This would include the ability to do this for loans made to governmental units, in addition to the other types of debt bonding and obligations that the bond bank already does. So I think this is just expanding this authority for sort of enforcing the rights of note holders to these new kinds of arrangements.
Shall the trustees name? Okay, one of those just going in trustees' name seems to be just making a correction, not having a whole lot to do with these new loans.
Yes, that is just
That's just updating like the municipal strike. Okay.
yeah, that's just updating the gender
To practice.
yeah, to conform with our drafting manual. We're moving away from using his or her.
And then you got amortization payments on the loans. Okay. Committee questions.
A lot, but if you're reporting it, okay.
Thank you, Senator, for that vote of confidence.
You can try to answer the questions.
The only good thing is nobody else knows any more than I do. Okay, yeah, we'll sit down and go over this because I think, and the House knows it's coming, so I'm assuming you guys have talked to the House, Mr. Gold, and we'll put this on miscellaneous tax and I'll do my homework, but basically, this is just the technicalities needed to allow the money, and the money that is coming in, Michael, is that specifically for, we list them, renewable energy, greenhouse gas, is that where the money, the federal monies are targeted, or is
Yeah, that's the language we modified related to energy efficiency and climate and those types of things. I think that was developed before my time, but that was associated with some legislative changes to authorize property assessed clean energy PACE, which never really got going in the state. But we felt like it was worthwhile to keep it in there because that is, as you identified, what we're likely targeting with the new dollars we're trying to access. They will be tied to energy efficiency, renewable, climate-related finance.
Okay, so this might help get some of those big old buildings weatherized, get better heating systems, different heating or HVAC systems, whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. All right, committee. Thank you. Thank you. Shouldn't do property taxes. Revenue bonds in the same day, but we're going back to the real world and we're gonna do the bottle bill.
Once again, solid waste brings everyone together.
It's or not. Okay, this is Thursday. Okay, Michael O'Grady's on here, but I'm not planning on. I don't think he did, I think, a really good walkthrough yesterday.
In the hall, he was, I think, gonna try to swing by. He
Okay,
was taking care of something.
dog clubs. Is that
Dog collars.
clubs? We have the miscellaneous ag bill and I'm trying to see. I do not see it on here. We need to get that out. That was the one with the dog clubs wanted us to put something on.
Dog.
Dog clubs. I don't know, but I told them to be in touch with Senator Starr. I told Senator Starr what I thought they wanted. And I told him I would hold the bill for a day. And so Ag could tell me if they want anything. I have not heard from Ag. So we might even try to do that. Is it on for today? No.
Should we go ask him?
We've got cannabis and alcohol. Okay, so tomorrow we also need, or we'll try it for the end of today, if we can move through this, to do the miscellaneous ag bill. Okay, so we did our walkthrough yesterday, and then today, and I apologize to everybody that I had bumped yesterday because of erratic floor schedules. And so we're back today. I have one witness who cannot be available until tomorrow. We tried to get her in yesterday and couldn't get the schedules to OLS, so I'm gonna have her come in and talk tomorrow at some point. Okay, so first on the agenda today is Bree Deatley. I probably massacred that name.
That's correct.
So the floor is yours. Just tell us who you are and who you represent.
Thanks, Chair Cummings, Vice Chair McDonald, and members of the committee. I'm Bree Deatley. I'm the principal of Breezeway Consulting in Somerville, Massachusetts, and I'm here today representing the Beverage Association of Vermont. I've worked on the bottle bill in Vermont for many years and around the country for many years. I also am the general manager of the commingling group in Vermont, which is the distributor group that manages the commingling system, which are the combined brands that together represent about 90% of the returns that come through the system. I'm not representing the group today. I am representing the Beverage Association, but can answer questions around commingling and other related issues. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today and your ability to squeeze us in given the tight schedules that you're under. I do want to say that as it stands, we are opposed to House Bill 158, and that's because of a couple of what I consider self-defeating amendments that have been added to the bill. We've been working on this issue since last session when Senator Bray convened a working group of a number of stakeholders, some of whom are sitting in the room with you today, where I think we hammered out a realistic view of how to turn Vermont's bottle bill into a sort of more modern system that reflects the way that the systems are being run in other parts of the world and should be run in order to be more efficient and effective. The concern that we have is that the proposal to expand the law to include more products really can't be done until the redemption system and the administration and structure of the system is ready for that. There's going to be a big influx of new containers, new products, new distributors that the system is at this juncture not ready to handle. I think all the stakeholders agreed with that. And then we need to make some changes before we hit the system with that new material. So there's two things I want to emphasize in my comments today that relate to those to two issues that we would like to see changed. The first is there's a provision that would trigger an increase in the redemption value to 10 cents if a certain redemption rate isn't maintained over time. And while that's couched in the legislation and in conversation as a trigger, we would argue that it's not in fact a trigger. It is a de facto increase in the deposit to 10 cents. And I want to explain a little bit about why that is and why we think that's a problem. First issue, why is a 10-cent deposit a problem? For Vermont, Vermont already has a serious problem with border redemption, cross-border redemption, where containers come in from outside the state for a 5-cent refund. A lot of that happens across the Connecticut River. As a manager of the commingling system, I see through the different redemption systems and through my own personal observation and through interventions that we've instigated through the Attorney General's office, significant amounts of fraudulent returns that come across the border. A 10-cent deposit only amplifies that incentive and increases it not just then to the New Hampshire border, but provides an incentive for containers to come into Vermont from Massachusetts and New York as well, creating a problem where more money is paid out than is taken in on the system, and distributors and consumers in Vermont ultimately pay for those returns. In addition, a 10-cent deposit puts Vermont retailers at an even more significant disadvantage than they're at today with regard to the neighboring states, again, pointing at New Hampshire because of the lack of sales tax, et cetera. You all are well aware of the influx of, or the exodus rather, of consumers to New Hampshire to buy a lot of consumer goods. We have documentation from the study that we helped do for Act 148 back in 2013 that showed that about 20% of the beverage containers that end up getting managed in the waste system in Vermont didn't come from Vermont. They weren't sold by Vermont companies. They came from someplace else. Setting up a 10-cent deposit just puts Vermont businesses, retail and distribution, at a significant disadvantage to those border states. So we don't really want to see Vermont as an island of a 10-cent sort of penalty on sales and bounty on returns. And the reason that we think that this is kind of an automatic trigger to a 10-cent deposit is the way that these trigger dates are set up in the legislation. If I walk through it with you, on July 1st of 2026, you kind of start the clock on saying, let's track what the redemption rate is. And if the redemption rate doesn't stay above 75%, we're going to increase the deposit. So we start looking at the rate in July of 26. In January of 27, we expand the law, adding ballpark twice as many containers to the deposit system as are in it today. And then at the end of June of 2028, we look and see if we were able to maintain a 75% redemption rate through that period when we added the expanded containers. Now, we know from experience in other parts of the country and other places that when the law is expanded, the redemption rate is going to drop. It's going to drop significantly, and it's going to take a while for the rate to come back up. Why is that? Well, the products that we're adding through expansion are not products that are that consumers are used to redeeming. In the one case, they're not used to redeeming water bottles and juice bottles and things like that. They're quite used to recycling those at home. And in fact, research has shown that they're recycling them at a fairly high rate at home. But consumers aren't used to redeeming those. It's going to take some time and some educating and frankly, a more convenient and effective redemption system for consumers to want to drag those additional containers to a redemption center to get a refund. So what can we look at in the past? In my written testimony, I provided a little bit more detail, but essentially looking at the last 3 states that expanded their laws and did so without sort of other changes at the same time, so we can sort of see what happened when they expanded. New York, Connecticut, and California all experienced between 11 and 13% drops in their redemption rates. Let me say that again. If we're at 75 today, ballpark mid-70s, we can expect expansion to drop the rate in Vermont down into the mid-60s to low 60s. And those rate declines in those states persisted. Connecticut has never returned to the rate that it was before expansion. New York returned to the rate that it had before expansion just last year. And California returned about 8 or 9 years later. So the expansion to these different containers is necessarily going to drop the redemption rate. And what that means is that Vermont's going to trigger automatically into that 10-cent deposit just by virtue of how the legislation with the amendments has stacked up the dates. And furthermore, 2 years after that, the state's somehow going to magically get to an 80% redemption rate, again, while trying to overcome the impact that expansion has had. So the bill is essentially setting up the program for failure in terms of beating those targets and therefore triggering a 10-cent deposit, which we think is unfortunate. We can clearly work with and have talked about with ANR and with other stakeholders about the potential of a future increase in deposits when a lot of other measures have been exhausted. When the key change and reform in this legislation that allows us to sort of support that part of it is the restructuring of the program into a single cooperative that would manage how the system is structured and put together. We think that restructuring is the key to this, and getting that restructuring in place, improving the redemption system, will give us the grounds for setting up the system and making it work better going forward. That group can improve redemption operations, it can improve education and outreach, do a lot of things to promote increased recycling without cutting off the legs of the retailers and others in the state that a 10-cent deposit would do. So let me just wrap up with the second point, sort of equally important from a financial perspective, and that is the sort of tossing about of the unclaimed deposits as a source of funds for different programs in the state. The unclaimed deposit money that's paid by consumers and left behind when no one redeems the containers used to be the property of distributors. It was used to defray the cost of the system. That money was taken away from distributors several years ago and has been redirected to other programs in the state. We believe, especially with the establishment of this new stewardship organization to manage the deposit system in Vermont, that system should have access to those unclaimed deposits. We're setting up a system like any other product stewardship system to fund operations. It should have access to all of the revenue from that system, including the unclaimed deposits, in order to make those investments. So what we've proposed in my written testimony and consistently throughout the session is that stewardship organization have access to the unclaimed deposits for the first 5 years of its existence, all of the unclaimed deposits. The organization is going to be transparent. It's going to be reporting its finances. There won't be any, sort of money drifting away on the side. The state will see exactly where that money is going, how it's being spent. And then after that 5-year period, revert to turning half of the unclaimed deposits back to the state of Vermont and allowing the stewardship organization to keep the other half. That's the principle that's in place in most other deposit systems around the world. The unclaimed deposits do all stay with those systems. Vermont, Massachusetts are the only programs in the country where none of that money is directed back into the system in order to help finance it. So those two amendments, those two issues are really the crux of our opposition to 158 as it stands today. Thank you again for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Senator Gray.
Quick question. Hi, Bree, good to see you again.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. So on the, and thanks for bringing up the concerns around cross-border effects. And I'm wondering on the current level of fraudulent redemption, I guess just call it that. We still are running a positive balance in terms of escheats. So it makes me think that, yes, it's happening, but it's happening at a rate that's modest enough that we're still retaining more, nickels than we're refunding back out to people. So that suggests that it's happening, but manageable. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, it is true. I mean, if we could magically, if I could snap my fingers and make all of the New Hampshire containers go away from all of the redemption centers across Vermont, what you would see is a lowering of the redemption rate. The rate would go down. I can't really say by how much. I don't know. It's an unknowable. And the amount of unclaimed deposits would go up. There would be more unclaimed deposits flowing to the state today if we didn't have cross-border fraud. So to the extent that we've made some fairly significant efforts over time to monitor and to reduce that, that it traditionally was done in the interest of the distributors to protect the unclaimed deposits, to allow more revenue for them to fund the system. Now there's a little less incentive for that because the funds are going off to the state. So the distributors really, we don't save that unclaimed deposit money by preventing fraud, but it's still in our interest to prevent it. And so we did engage with the AG and with ANR, send letters to towns in New Hampshire. I mean, the containers, a lot of them are coming from municipal recycling programs in New Hampshire, where they're literally collected at the drop-off centers at the municipal recycling locations, brought in on trucks and redeemed at redemption centers in Vermont. So it's an organized, structured system that's sort of systematically defrauding Vermont consumers of that money and the state of Vermont of that money. So when you go to 10 cents, the situation compounds itself. You get more fraud and the amount of unclaimed deposits shrinks because the redemption rate is going to spike up.
Sure. Well, we've asked ANR about enforcement, and they've told our committee, maybe you have a different impression, that they are enforcing, especially against those larger organized municipal efforts, and my impression was they had ended that practice because people across the river realized it was actually fraudulent, and municipalities don't usually want to be involved in fraud once informed.
Yeah, I think we did with that initial letter sent off to the border towns, reduce that, but I was at a redemption center within the last several months where I saw a whole flatbed trailer full of recycling hoops and containers and bins and tubs that had names of different towns in New Hampshire on them. The practice continues. It's clear. You don't have to, you can ride with me along the Connecticut River Valley, and I can show you any number of places where that's happening today.
All right, shotgun. The other really quick question is, the bill provides for barcoding. So
yes,
if there were serious concerns on the part of producers about fraud, could they not code if they wanted a Vermont, a deposit bottle differently than a non-deposit bottle? Well, it could be their choice.
Well, theoretically, that would be true. It would be true if product were bottled for the state of Vermont, but in fact, product is manufactured, especially as we get into these non-carbonated products that would be subject to expansion. There might be one facility in the entire country where all of the, let's say, Gatorade bottles get made. Yeah. So to say that you're going to take that factory, stop the production line, put in the Vermont bottles, with their barcode on them, fill them, and then make sure in the supply chain that they only go to Vermont, and make sure you filled exactly the right number for Vermont for that summer, depending on how hot it's going to be. And if you misguess, then you're going to be out of Gatorade for Vermont for the summer. The logistics are absurdly complex. Okay. And if you look at the fact that that's one of hundreds of products, it's virtually impossible in today's supply chains to be able to target products just for a single state.
Okay, I'm gonna move this along. Natural Resources has had their chance to talk to Bree. And we've got a really full agenda, so.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I believe that the witness is presenting information that isn't fully presented.
Does the presenter have any more information to present to us? I don't think so.
No, I'm finished. You do have my written testimony.
Rate of return.
You may ask.
How do you compute rate of return?
Well, for the members of the commingling group, for example, we get reports from each of the distributors who are part of the commingling organization each month on the different channels through which the returns come. They use different agents, Tomra and Vipco, other stores that report back how many containers either came through their redemption centers or through their reverse vending machines. I total that up and compare that with the total number of containers that they sold in a month. And simultaneously, the tax department is collecting every quarter from all of the distributors in the state, the total number of sales and the total number of redemptions. They're obligated to do that under the law in order to report their unclaimed deposits.
So when you say that the total number, the rate of return goes down, if you put a redeemable stamp on more containers, the rate of return shall go down. That's,
Yes.
of course it'll go down. Because you are putting more bottles and cans out there to be redeemed. And they're not all gonna be, all the new items are not gonna be redeemed, and the rate will go down.
I think you are agreeing with the presenter. That's exactly what she said, that the states that have done this, I think the concern is that unless the rate goes up or stays the same, we're going to increase the deposit. And I believe the objection is that experience in the country says that when you greatly increase things, that it will go down. And the objection is that the timing for increasing the deposit is off.
Correct. Thank you.
Okay. I thought that's what I heard. Nobody's arguing that the rate of redemption won't go down. Is that all right? We shouldn't do this and tax property tax in the same day.
There is a variable, and it's how long are you assessing the decreased rate before the trigger is,
Okay.
and it's 2 years.
I want to get through the witnesses and then we can have committee discussion. Do we have any more questions for Bree? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, our next is Scott DeFife. Is Scott with us? There he is.
And
Okay,
Madam Chair, yes.
welcome and just introduce yourself for the record and who you represent.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm Scott DeFife. I'm the president of the Glass Packaging Institute. We are the trade association that represents the glass container manufacturing industry and also glass recyclers in North America. And I'm very pleased to be with the committee today in support of the bill of H-158 as it's come through the committee process from the House to the Senate and to the Finance Committee. The Glass Recycling, the Glass Packaging Institute is, while we represent the glass container manufacturers, is dedicated to increasing glass recycling across the country, to increase the amount of recycled content that we have, and to make glass containers ever more sustainable than they already are. We are very happy with the provisions that have been added to include the wine bottles into the program as it is. And I can talk about the different paths that glass takes in the recycling stream and answer some of the questions that I heard even in the walkthrough yesterday. But just know that glass is an infinitely recyclable material. A glass container is made out of raw materials, which are fairly simple: silica sand, limestone, and soda ash, and recycled glass. The typical glass bottle made in North America today is averaging around 30% recycled content and has averaged around 30% recycled content for a couple decades. It is the benefit to using recycled content, using recycled glass to make new bottles to the environment. Once you've converted the raw materials in a furnace once into glass, it remains as glass for as long as you can get your hands on it and turn it back into another glass container. Therefore, all of the carbon is shed in the first time that you've converted the raw materials into carbon, into glass, and you can turn the temperature of the furnace down because it takes less energy to melt what is already glass than to convert the raw materials into glass. So using more and more recycled content to make new glass containers is an environmentally beneficial and offsets raw material use at a better than 1-to-1 ratio. So a ton of recycled glass back into a furnace offsets more than a ton of raw materials being put back into the batch mix of your typical container plant. It's a regional commodity. There are glass plants in New York, in Pennsylvania, in Quebec, and in Ontario that all use the existing glass that comes today from the Vermont bottle bill. In my testimony that I sent, written testimony, I included some pictures of the difference between what is typically the quality level of typical bottle bill glass versus the quality of commingled single stream glass. I will be honest, that picture is not from Vermont, but the picture of the Murph glass is really almost any single stream material, because of how glass is treated in the curbside process, is really your residual material that has some glass in it. So when you look at a pile of glass from the commingled curbside system, it looks more like trash than it looks like a pile of clean commodity material. And then that material needs much more greater processing at a secondary MRF to clean up so that it can go back into a furnace application. We can get glass out of the curbside back into bottle to bottle, but it is much more difficult, rarer, and more expensive to do it that way than it is from the cleaner streams of bottle bill glass, especially in the Northeast, where 5 states have clean streams of deposit return glass, bottle bill glass, and therefore a lot of the processing capacity in New England is geared towards the cleaner streams. Quebec and Toronto also have these cleaner streams. So together with New York and your neighbors in Maine and Massachusetts and Connecticut, that clean stream of glass all requires less deep processing. So the processing capacity in the region is geared to handle the bottle bill glass more. The chart that I added to the end really shows the yield that comes out of it. And while all of the glass is the same and it has the same potential end markets, bottle to fiberglass, aggregate, sandblasting, other uses, the likelihood of a bottle from the curbside system making it back into a bottle to bottle application is far lower than it is for a bottle in the deposit system, which is very likely to end up back in a bottle plant.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I'm happy to answer any glass questions. I heard some yesterday, and happy to help and be in support of 158.
Okay. Senator Rahm, if you're there, I can't see you, so either drop Jill a red flag or holler. Senator Bray.
Good question. Hi, Scott. Thank you for coming back again. The quick question, I don't have it right here in my notes. For clean glass centers that are making new bottles, can you remind us of where they are located and whether or not there's more available on more facilities are available in our region where that happens?
Yes, absolutely. There are glass processing facilities in Connecticut, in Massachusetts, in New York, in Pennsylvania. Most of the main glass goes up through to Quebec, I believe. The Vermont glass may end up in New York or Quebec or Toronto, or quite frankly in Connecticut. And sometimes it depends on color and who's sourcing clear glass or green glass or amber glass. But the commingled program And the collectors, the TOMRA collectors and the folks that are doing the work on the ground are taking that glass material to the proper end markets and getting it processed. But there are glass processing facilities in all the neighboring states that handle the regional amount of glass. No one state in New England has enough, to supply one particular facility. We think of that as a regional economy.
Okay, did you say that the centers are specialized by the color of glass so that we could be sending to 3 or 4 centers?
What I'm saying is that the folks that do the gathering and the sorting know that different end markets and who needs which color, glass and that nature. The Vermont system does not have to color sort the materials. The processing facilities can color sort the materials and then get the different colors to different end markets.
Okay, the processing facilities are where we would deliver the glass.
And in the new system, the PRO would be responsible for getting that glass to the processing facility.
Okay, but that could be 3 or 4 different.
Yes, but they're all
doing clear glass and one's doing amber glass. That could be several different. Okay, that's a change from what we heard last year. All right, we were just talking about taking it to New York.
Well, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure that we're clear that I'm not confusing everyone. Any one processing facility is probably serving the different end markets. So if the PRO is going to gather up all the glass and decides to send it to one of the facilities, whether it's in New York or Connecticut, that facility then can get the glass to its proper places, right? What I was trying to say is that one bottle plant may be making beer bottles and it needs the amber glass. Another plant may be making the food jars and it needs the clear glass.
Okay, any other questions? If not, I'm going to move on to Susan Collins. Susan is up there.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, welcome. Just introduce yourself and who you represent for the record, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. My name is Susan Collins. I am the president of the Container Recycling Institute, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We specialize in beverage container recycling data. And I have a presentation that I will try to make this the right view.
And where are you located?
We're located in California.
Okay, so you are a national organization.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Here we go. Slideshow, there we go, sorry for that. Always takes a second. So I'll move on to the next one. I'm just going to cover briefly the benefits of deposit systems. I just have a few slides. First of all, the number one benefit that they're most known for is, of course, the very, very high redemption rates that are possible. There are countries in Europe that are getting more than 90% redemption. 80% is sort of the worldwide average. We've talked about in this committee how they produce clean, recycled materials for manufacturing that are desired by the manufacturers to make new bottles and cans again. They also create jobs and new businesses. They shift end-of-life costs for used beverage containers to producers. And something that hasn't been discussed a lot in this hearing is how much they reduce litter. Many studies have been showing that they reduce it by 50%, beverage container litter, that is.
That has been discussed in this body for
Excellent.
more than a few years.
They conserve energy and natural resources, and we've calculated the greenhouse gas emissions that would be saved as a result of this bill, and it's the equivalent of taking 1,538 cars off the road. So it's the energy savings and greenhouse gas savings are tremendous. And then they prevent other types of pollution too, basically air pollution from manufacturing of new containers.
Okay, that greenhouse gas reduction is in not producing new products.
Exactly. That's where most of the savings occur. It's It's that it's the mining of new materials, like mining of aluminum. And as Scott was just talking about, the conversion of raw materials to glass produces carbon dioxide directly. So that's where most of the greenhouse gas emissions are saved.
But don't you have to redo aluminum cans or plastic bottles?
Don't you, I'm sorry, I didn't hear a word or two of the question.
Reuse.
Reuse.
Recycled materials. We got glass, they redo that. Plastic, the last I heard, was getting turned into polar fleece. I'm assuming there's some energy involved there.
Yeah, actually, I think it would be best if I hold that question for a couple more slides, because I have an entire slide just on PET where we can go into that.
Good.
Yeah. So we've highlighted here the higher recycling rates that are possible. This is the US data for the containers that are on deposit in the United States. Those containers are being recycled at a 65%, while the US are being recycled at a 24% rate. So it's almost a threefold increase if you have the containers on deposit. But what's happening in Vermont is the bar on the far right that is green. Vermont's program only covers 48% of the beverages sold in the state and is not able to reap all of the potential benefits of the program. Whereas the top 4 programs have about 90% of their beverages covered by those programs, with Maine being the top state.
And what does it mean when it says mixed on Maine?
Those are the deposit levels.
That's the deposit. All right.
Yes. Yeah, the 5 versus 15 cents.
Okay.
So Scott already talked about glass. Here is a photograph. These 2 pictures were taken at the same facility on the same day. One of those piles is glass bottles from deposit programs, and the other pile is glass from a curbside program. And there's just a tremendous amount of paper in there that sort of floated to the top. So the whole pile looks like it's paper, but there's really a lot of glass under there. But it just shows you, it's really difficult.
Okay, Susan, you break
the
up
glass
occasionally here. It might, maybe if you turned off your video and just let us see the screen, because you keep breaking up. So try take your video off, and then we can just hear the audio.
Trying to do that, and the commands aren't showing up.
It's just that occasionally you freeze for a moment.
I apologize for that. And I am unable to do that. I'm just unable to find the button that does that. I'll see if I can get through this PET slide for you, though. I just want to highlight a couple of the facts that are on this page to answer your question. The product use potential at the very bottom of the slide shows that deposit PET is the material type that is very much desired by food and beverage manufacturers.
Okay, what is PET?
Polyethylene terephthalate plastic.
This is a new language.
I'm sorry for using jargon. It is the type of plastic that is used to make water bottles and soda bottles.
Okay, that is helpful. Thank you.
It is very much desired when it comes through a deposit program because it is clean plastic that is food grade plastic that doesn't have improper additives in it. Other types of uses, like if it's used to make a bottle for clean.
We have lost you.
Additives in those bottles.
Okay, you're back.
But when you have food and beverage bottles, the FDA regulates what types of additives are in the bottles. So if you're going to make food and beverage bottles again, you want to be using material that has only been used to make food and beverage bottles so that it doesn't contain the additives that you don't want in your food and beverage bottles. So you mentioned that's where most of the curbside PET goes. So that's the bottom row of this table. I'll highlight a couple of other things. Most of the facilities that accept the food and beverage bottles from deposit programs, those facilities are very close to Vermont because they're taking material from the deposit states. Most of the curbside PET has to go to plants in the South because those are where the plants are that accept curbside PET. And the last thing on this slide I'll highlight is the pricing. The pricing is almost, right now, it's almost worth versus curbside PET.
Okay.
The last slide I have here is just, I'm not going to go through all of this. I just want to let you know that you're not alone in wanting to update your deposit law. 4 other states have updated their deposit laws in the last couple of years. And the province of Quebec has also gone through a major update. And these materials are available to you. With that, I will just say thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions. We have many more resources available on our website. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you. And did you send your slides to us?
Yes, I did.
Okay, good. Then they are on our website. Any questions for Susan? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going on to Aaron Segrist. A live person. Hello. Hello. Oh, good, good. Yes, it's me. I'm alive. Grateful for that. Thank you all for your time today. I know that you're in the throes of getting out of here, so I appreciate your time. For the record, I am Aaron Segrist, president of the Vermont Retail and Grocers Association. Just a little background about VRGA. We represent over 750 members across the state, which include many types of businesses, general retail, grocery stores, convenience stores, redemption centers, distributors, food and beverage manufacturers, etc. Just under 500 of those members are food retail related members. Of those members, 8% are redemption centers. And of nearly the 500 members that the bottle bill may impact, the vast majority of members oppose expansion of the bottle bill. In our most recent survey, 95% of retailers are against expansion. 96% of respondents agree that the redemption system needs to be fixed systematically before we can move forward. And 95% report that their third-party processor continues to fail in picking up consistently on a regular basis, which overwhelms the redemption space and withholds pertinent resources from retailers. We're talking thousands of dollars, which those centers and retailers need to continue to effectively run their business. Given the issues within the system today, it's financially and physically impossible for retailers to manage any type of expansion. At the end of last session, you've already heard that the Senate Natural Resources Committee convened a small stakeholder group to discuss this very issue. And while we did not unanimously agree on everything, we did agree that the more oversight is necessary. In regards to the PRO, there are several outstanding questions that need to be addressed when it comes to retailers. How does commingling work within the PRO? Will there be multiple commingling programs under the PRO umbrella? Will there be multiple PROs? How will that work? Who will oversee those PROs? What is the role of retailers and redemption centers under that new system? Will a PRO reduce the sorts that redemption centers and retailers face? We're looking at over 130 different sorts at this point. What does a third-party pickup system look like? Are there going to be multiple third parties picking up? Are we going to be guaranteed consistent pickup? Significant questions that many of my members have raised.
And I also want to take a moment to raise questions, similar concerns, I guess, that were raised yesterday during your discussion. Will this impact other recycling efforts? Absolutely, it will impact other recycling efforts. The state, this legislature, past legislatures encouraged zero sort recycling several years ago. Companies made major investments into streamlining recycling the process. And now we're talking about taking some of that material out of the blue bins, which will essentially increase recycling costs and, I'm assuming, trash hauling costs, not just for businesses, but also for the state. Additionally, in response to the many locations being able to afford a reverse vending machine, which I'm sure you'll hear about, the third-party pickup vendor has consistently pointed to the need for more reverse vending machines. However, redemption centers and retailers are on the hook for buying those machines. You'll hear about a machine, I believe, from another witness behind me, and that machine cost over $100,000, again, that the redemption center had to pay for. These are small businesses that will be on the hook for more than $100,000 in finance, and that's a significant ask when we are completely unsure how this system is going to look 5 years down the road. I also want to report that I've heard from several members who are now paying well above $15 an hour to pay someone to sort containers. The Senate Natural Resources Committee visited a redemption center last year, and we figured out that containers are touched 6 times a piece. That's a significant lift, well above $15 an hour to touch an empty container multiple times. The system is broken, and we certainly agree that more oversight needs to happen. We agree that we cannot continue down this road, but I don't think we can jump on a speeding train and think that we're going to fix it without additional discussion among all stakeholders. I'll be really quick. We also do oppose the escalator to 10 cents for the, for the same reasons that Bree explained earlier, so I won't get back into that. And then I just wanted to address your question, Senator Brock, about how the system would work in Franklin County. So you have at least 3 redemption centers. And I know that there's language also in there that would require that no resident travel more than 15 minutes to a redemption center. I think that's unrealistic in a very rural state. And I would question how that is going to be met by the PRO. I think you did hear yesterday from Ledge Council that there are other non-store related redemption systems. However, again, those systems are expensive. And also, how is that going to impact existing redemption centers? The last thing we want to do is put our small business, independently owned businesses out of business. So I think, again, we need additional conversation, and there are too many answers that we're looking for. So I'm happy to answer questions to the best of my ability.
Okay, I'm going to give the rest of the committee a chance. Senator, you've had your time.
Well, I know some things the rest
Okay,
don't know.
well, let us learn. Anybody in this side, except Donald, have a question? All right, Senator Bray, then you can have your question.
Well, so I appreciate the survey stuff, which we're familiar with those numbers for last year, which is why the design, frankly, spends 2 years improving redemption before there's any expansion of materials. So there's a long lead-in before there's an expansion in redemption. So we heard that concern. 96% of people redemption centers saying we want to just expand as is. And so the leading around of the question was, do you feel as though the proposed remedies or strategies that are in the bill now that a PRO could implement are insufficient to improve, sort of the life of redemption centers, which was one of our goals?
I think that's a great question, but we don't know what that looks like. we have a commingling system right now that we can't seem to get more manufacturers to participate in. So my concern is how are we going to require every manufacturer that sends a container into the state to participate? If we have one PRO, I'm assuming it's a fairly small organization, right? So there are thousands of manufacturers that send containers into the state. How are we going to get all of those manufacturers in? And, you know, I think, yes, I fully appreciate the efforts that you have undertaken with the Senate Natural Resources Committee. My concern is 2 years is not long enough.
Okay. There are, you know, I would hope people would find it reassuring. We have other PRO like extended producer responsibility programs for a variety of materials, and we do get manufacturers registering with us because they decided to do business in Vermont. The other, so I will, this is not supposed to be a troubling question, but it is honestly, it does, I wonder why we end up, people say, well, I don't know how far or how much time I'm going to put into redeeming something. But it seems like the other side of that coin is how much time do people put in traveling to go buy that thing to begin with? And the goal in the end is to make redemption as easy as purchasing. And that's maybe a perfect thing, but it seems as though any effort as regards redemption is a negative, but people will spend a lot of time to go out and buy those things. And it feels to me like there should be some balancing of expectations around efforts to process materials in an environmentally sound way.
So my only concern is consumers want convenience, right? I will not ask everyone to raise their hand who doesn't redeem. I'll be the first to tell you, I throw my redeemables in the blue bin. Maybe I shouldn't say that on the record, but consumers want convenience. And there are systems that have been put in place that have been supported by past legislatures that provide that convenience. And now we are changing the expectation, right? So you're taking a significant amount of what we have been told to put into the blue bin and taking it out and putting it into another system that's not convenient. And I think that's a significant concern, especially when we're mandating that if we don't meet these very lofty goals within a very short time frame, we are facing a 10-cent deposit. And I can tell you, and I know it's overused, but it is true. People have no problem crossing a state border to go shopping. And it is a significant issue where they'll go shopping and they're not taking their containers back to where they bought them. They're taking their containers back to a redemption center here in Vermont, which takes money out of the system in order to make it work. So it's all about convenience, and this is just a magnification of a lack of inconvenience.
Sure. Vermont retailers and grocers, do you have anyone in the single stream? Do you have any members that are single stream businesses? I'm just trying to understand the concern about affecting the single stream industry.
It's going to negatively impact the cost of our members doing business. We anticipate that our recycling costs are going to increase, and therefore I would assume our trash would increase. And also we're paying more people to redeem twice as many containers, which is, I had a member tell me he's paying one employee $19 an hour to sort containers. Now we're going to expand that number of containers to be redeemed.
Okay, I just, Senator Bray, you know the mechanics, I don't.
Yeah.
So you're a small grocer, in a small town. And somebody brings back their beer cans, their wine, well, they're not bringing wine bottles now, their soda cans. you know, whatever they bring back, you have to sort them into all soda cans or soda cans that go to Seagram's and soda cans that go to Canada Dry. How detailed is the sorting? Or is it cans and bottles, or is it by manufacturer?
By manufacturer, I believe, but I should get clarification on that. So there's a commingling group, so a group that has said, okay, we can throw all of our containers into one bucket.
And that, I think we
Yes.
heard last time, was greatly making things convenient,
Yes.
but not so. I think I've heard two ongoing concerns. One is that everybody agrees that the system needs to be fixed. It's not working. It's not working for anyone, really. There's a concern that the great expansion of return of deposit bottles will expand before the system is fixed. And that gets to concerns we heard yesterday about convenience to, the consumer, and today you said convenience to the stores. You're commingling people, are not picking them up, which means you've got to have space that could be retail space that is storing the bottles. So you need to know before you double the volume of bottles that they're going to go out of there, and preferably unsorted. Then again, 15 minutes is a half-hour round trip. Depending on the waiting line I remember when the snow melted and banks and rivers were full of tires because it was not convenient to recycle tires. You have to go, and you're a busy family, and you've already gone 10, 20 miles in the other direction to buy the containers. And now you've got to go to a redemption center somewhere else, and then you find out you have to wait
Hours.
I've heard the wait now on Saturday morning is at least a half hour. I'm afraid you'll see the bags go over the side. So I think that it's a matter of convenience. It's not, we've got household waste that people are supposed to take. Some people can get someone to pick up their little cans, and I don't know why the Bears haven't figured out they can walk down my street and eat really well on certain mornings. But you see little plastic tubs outside, but a lot of people are driving those. And so we're trying to do recycling, and I think we all want it to work, but we've got to work out the convenience. And you brought up the new, who is paying for the $100,000 machine?
The stores.
Now, is that the plan under this, that the redemption centers would pay for the $100,000 machine?
So one of the reasons that a portion of these sheets for 5 years was steered back to the PRO to help support the PRO. The PRO, for instance, might be, all the ways that you might support a
I'm
redemption
looking for a
center.
yes or no answer, Senator.
I'll just say yes, and then we can
Okay.
get into the.
So the
nitty-gritty.
manufacturer, the stores are going to have to buy the
Well, I
machine.
have to, people will have choice, there's a lot of choices as to how things, I feel like we're sort of falling into the trap of the most negative scenarios as opposed to, there are options that will, I think, work far better than the current system.
Yes, I think there are, but I think also that there's a lot of unknowns, and when there are unknowns, if I were a small store and I didn't know if I were going to be charged $100,000 or at the present rate of inflation, $200,000 for a machine, that would give me reservations if we could in about 2 minutes, I'm going to start voting out bills.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Not this one. If we could upfront give some security to the stores and some security that the system will be in place before they're caught with a deluge of bottles, I think that might help.
Okay, so I'd say, yes, there will be assistance for stores. Smaller stores are exempted from having to redeem 5,000 square feet and under.
If there is a system within a certain amount, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that your, so
I'll double, I was trying to flip pages and keep up with the conversation, so I have to come back to that one. But
We're gonna have committee discussion, and I've got 3 more witnesses, and I've got a half an hour, and I need to get the cannabis and alcohol bill out today before 4:30 meeting.
to remind people of the timeline, the PRO formation work starts in 24. There's no expansion of the materials in the system till 27.
Okay, I'm thinking that it might be a good idea to have some kind of a check back to make sure that the PRO system is in fact in place before we expand. Because if it isn't, and this turns out to be one of those photos on the national news of tons of plastic sitting around in warehouses, it's not gonna help. So that's just my thought.
I'm not disagreeing in any way. A&R, should there not be an adequate PRO created, A&R creates it.
This is not reassuring.
I have one very quick request.
I knew that would be a winner.
I've lots to say, but we're out of time, so.
So in the event that this bill does pass, we had redemption centers and retailers last year asked to increase the non-commingled handling fee. That unfortunately got caught up. So that is in section 1, and it looks like section 1 takes effect January 2027. So the redemption centers and retailers that I have heard from would like that to be sooner than 2027.
I should double check because the intent is, the co-mingling fee.
Okay, we'll check that, because yes,
That's a long-standing request.
yes, I
We
hear
all-
we had
we all
redemption
support it.
centers closing because it was not
Yes.
profitable.
And again, I want to clarify, it's the non-commingled.
It's not, yes,
Yeah,
it's the ones you gotta sit and sort by hand.
it's 130. Yes.
Okay,
Thank you very much for your time.
okay, I am running out of. I don't see John McCann. Oh, again.
And Kate-
Okay,
Kate's
I'm
be
gonna
here too.
skip Marcy because Marcy's here regularly. But I got John and Ethan Hayes, and I'm gonna try and get them in.
Can I ask you to put somebody ahead of me? Because I think Kate wants to do the representation for us on a branch today. She just had to step out a second.
Okay, so we'll do Ethan. Ethan, are you here from Morrisville Beverage? And I apologize, this is the end of the session. So if you can give us 5 minutes, I will, 10 minutes, and I'm gonna get those bills. Okay. So, Mr. Hayes, the floor is yours. Just introduce yourself for the record and who you are, and who you represent.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Ethan Hayes. I'm the general manager of Morrisville Beverage, an independent beverage store, Vermont Liquor Agency, and certified bottle redemption center. We process approximately 4.8 million deposit containers per year. We support H158 and its expansion of additional containers into the deposit system and the structure it puts in place to support expansion and modernization. We believe that keeping more containers in the closed loop benefits the environment, reduces supply chain issues, and provides an incentive for Vermonters to recycle their containers, unlike the single stream bins. In 2021, our company and our store invested significantly in upgrading our facility. We purchased new bulk reverse vending technology to allow us to process an additional volume of containers, increase efficiency, and reduce fraud. Prior to October 2021, we were a hand count only facility with 2 full-time employees. Unlike traditional RVMs, the new model allows customers to redeem up to 100 plus aluminum cans and plastic bottles combined at once, thereby reducing wait times and accounting for the many brands and container sizes. This process also reduces the amount of square footage dedicated to sorting and bagging, as the machine compacts all the containers and provides an accurate count to the pickup agent. The containers are automatically sorted by material type, dropped into bins for ease of pickup. We still employ all the employees we had prior to our upgrades. We pay them well above minimum wage, but instead of spending hours sorting through hundreds of distributor sorts, our employees are now assisting customers more directly, maintaining a cleaner facility, and providing much needed labor in the front of our store. We have also instituted a bag drop program, established relationships with several charity groups for bottle drives and pickups at their drop-off locations. Our investment in new technology has allowed us to be prepared for an increased volume of containers that an expanded bottle bill would cover. It also helps us reduce fraud by using barcodes to verify if the container is in fact redeemable. Provisions in H158 assist in this process by requiring the barcodes to be placed on all containers and for the barcodes to be made available prior to the product being sold. Enacting H158 will move the bottle bill to the modern era, help Vermont do its part in closing the loop, engage distributors and manufacturers in the process, make redemption convenient and sustainable into the future. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. It sounds like you are where we want to go. The question is, can I ask how much it cost you to get there? Because that's what we've got to help other people do.
Yeah, certainly. It's a significant
Just round
expense.
numbers. We've heard
Yeah.
$100,000 for a vending machine thing, but sounds like you've gone to the next step.
Yeah, the machine that we have, we were the first privately owned redemption center on the East Coast to purchase one. It was well over $100,000 for that machine. The large machine, it does a lot. It does more than anything that anybody else in Vermont has seen. We saw it as a giant leap forward, not a small step, and not just for the possibility of an expanded bottle bill, but for the labor shortages that we were having and reducing the number of sorts that we had to do. So we were in over $100,000 for that machine, plus a glass machine to handle only the glass. That was approximately $20,000. And then we made some significant upgrades to our facility to convert it from a dusty old bottle room to a redemption center. So all in, we were over 200,000 between machines and construction, with about a 5-year payoff at our current container volume that we have now. And that would only decrease that payoff time with expanded containers.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Any questions? Do you have a question?
Yeah. Good to see you again. We've had a question running about how long it takes to redeem. So can you say something? We never talked about this before. An unprompted question. What kind of lines are you seeing on weekends or whatever?
Certainly not what we used to when we were hand count only facility. I mean, now we give customers more options. They can come in and they can use their machine. A person with 3 bags that has around 140 containers or so in it at a time, they're here for maybe 10 or 15 minutes to get through those containers. Sometimes it's even quicker than that if they don't have to separate. If they come in all sorted out with no glass in their bags and they're ready to go, 10, 15 minutes tops. If folks don't want to wait at all, they're welcome to drop off their bags, and we will either hand count those in the back or we'll put them through the machine during after hours when we're closed, when we have extra staff available to do that.
So you just label them so you know whose bottle redeemables they were. Okay, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Senator Brock.
So just to understand then, the process, the method that you use right now, the customer is responsible for putting the bottles in the machine and doing the sorting as opposed to your employees, is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
And to the best of your knowledge, how many other facilities like yours are there in Vermont?
There aren't any with this level of technology in Vermont.
None.
None yet.
Okay. 3 per county? How many counties? How much money? That's where we are, okay.
Well, can I say something? You know, we're talking about wages. At $19 an hour, that's $38K a year. And how many employees do you have at $38K a year? So you could balance labor against investment in technology that lets you process software. I mean, it's a business.
Yes, it
And
is.
it's a business that's attractive enough that,
But I think he said he didn't lay you off.
yeah, I know.
Well, what I heard was that
Okay,
the labor is
getting
being
into
done
discussion and
by
I'm-
the customer at this point.
Going to let Kate McCann
I've seen a lot of
testify.
customers buy
We will
them.
have lots of time for discussion.
Well, probably more than that.
So you
Loud discussion.
Lindsay came up with it, I wanted to make sure I could double check. So the commingling fee changes from 3.94 effective July 1 of this year. That is separate time. It is
Yeah.
effective immediately.
It was the non-commingled, I think.
Okay, well,
the handling.
commingled, non-commingled differential changes immediately. And the other thing for square footage on stores, 5,000 square feet.
Okay, I think we got that. Kate, you know the drill.
For the record, Representative Kate McCann, I represent Montpelier. I'm here today on behalf of North Branch Vineyards that I co-own with my husband, John McCann. We're also representing Montpelier Vineyards, Due North Vineyards, Putney Mountain Winery, Brook Farm Winery, and Lucky Bugger Winery. A quick bit about North Branch Vineyards. We own and operate the winery out of our home since 2007. Bottle production has fluctuated based on availability and affordability of grapes and juice. John is a one-person show. He planted all but 100 of the 3,500 vines in Middlesex, and I often remind him that I swooped in to support him in planting the last 100. He just finished pruning last week all 3,500 vines. He will spend the summer managing and mowing the vineyard. We will rely on friends and family at harvest. John will craft all the wine. We will again rely on friends and family to help bottle. And throughout, John will distribute to retailers within 50 miles of Montpelier, sell our wines at craft events, and sell directly to consumers from the winery. We don't have time to chase bottles, and we can't afford to pay an estimated $2,500 a year for a PRO to chase them for us. I would like to read two paragraphs. Under section 1522, as passed by the House, paragraph states, with respect to beverage containers that contain a vinous beverage, a deposit of 15 cents shall be paid by the consumer on each beverage container sold at the retail level and refunded to the consumer upon return of the empty beverage container. Paragraph B, a retailer or a person operating a redemption center who redeems beverage containers shall be reimbursed by the manufacturer or distributor of such beverage containers in an amount that is 3.5 cents per container for containers of beverage brands that are part of a commingling program, and 5 cents per container for containers of beverage brands that are not part of a commingling program. The small wine producers are willing to collect the 15 cents from the consumer during purchase. However, the manufacturer should pay the state of Vermont similar to sales and use tax and excise tax, not directly to the redemption centers as stated in paragraph B. The small producer would have to send checks to each individual redemption center rather than one check to the state. Doing this is timely and costly. The state should pay the redemption centers based on the bottles collected and paid to the consumer. Under section 1523, as passed by the House, paragraph 2 states, a manufacturer or distributor shall not refuse to pick up from a retailer that sells its product or a person operating a certified redemption center any empty beverage containers labeled in accordance with section 1524. This means that a small producer like North Branch Vineyards would not only have to run around the state and pick up our bottles from each redemption center, but also every retail location where bottles are sold and collected. Again, this is timely and costly. Under this bill, we can hire a PRO to do this work, but at a significant cost. It was estimated that for a 30,000 bottle winery, we would have to pay roughly $2,500 a year to the PRO, whether they pick up 30,000 bottles or one bottle. Under section 1531, as passed by the House, paragraph 2 states, the producer responsibility organization does not create any unreasonable barriers to joining the producer responsibility organization and shall take into the consideration the needs of small manufacturers that do not generate a significant volume of containers. What does shall take into the consideration the needs of small manufacturers mean? My suggestion is rather than paying a flat fee to the PRO, there should be a per bottle pickup fee. A per bottle fee would be roughly 8 cents per bottle based on the above estimate. This makes it more equitable for small producers. If 1,000 bottles were collected, then the small producer would only have to pay $80 to the PRO. Just because we produce 30,000 bottle volume doesn't mean that 30,000 bottles are actually sold and collected. The majority of our wine is sold to tourists who purchase and take back to their home state. Lastly, nowhere in the bill does it discuss what happens to the bottles once the PRO picks them up from the redemption center. Where do they go? Do they go to the recycling center? Our bottles already go to the recycling center. It's the recycling center who cannot properly handle the bottles, and this is where the focus should be. Instead of paying a PRO, the 15-cent bottle redemption should go into a better sorting process at the recycling center, bypassing the redemption center and PRO, which also reduces the carbon footprint caused by trucking containers throughout the state. Here's the scenario. Small winery, such as North Branch Vineyard, sells a product at a Vermont craft show. The consumer buys a bottle and returns to their small Vermont rural town. They enjoy the wine and eventually bring the bottles to their local small redemption center. The redemption center refuses the bottle based on their size and capacity. Options for the customer: put the bottle in the recycling and call it a day? Likely. But let's say, in a more unlikely case, that the consumer hangs on to that bottle or bottles and travels 40 minutes or so to a bigger redemption center. Now we have a bottle or two to pick up in Newport and a bottle or two to pick up in Bennington that we're responsible for chasing around the state. And doing what with these bottles? Are they then going to Casella? Really? Why doesn't Casella just pick up all the redemption centers? Our other option, as we understand it, is our hand is forced into paying a PRO thousands of dollars to pick them up. And what do they do with them? Bring them to Casella? What? This bill has so many unanswered questions that it would be premature to pass this bill at this time. Instead, a study should be performed to address costs and environmental impacts due to transportation. I'm asking you to vote no, as passed by the House and amended by the Natural Resource Committee. Thank you for your time, John and Kate.
Thank you. We have this in writing, so we can go back and look at the sections that you reference, okay?
Yep.
I'm gonna have to cut this off because we have 10 minutes to get two major bills out of here.
Heads up to how's that? Thank you.
Thank you. And I have, I don't know if you can let Michelle know that we're ready and Bryn, and there is a Nicholas Sherman. And I don't know if he's here. Where? Well, if he's not here, I have no idea what normal is. He asked to testify on this bill. I also, is that his? No, this is the latest from Michelle. Because right now, I think we're getting ready to vote this bill out. I think. That's Mr. Bonbank.
As we transition, can I correct one vast misimpression which might stale anyone on this bill? No manufacturer is required under the bill to drive around the state and pick up their bottles.
No, I think, but they have to hire someone that does, and I think $2,500 might be the profit margin.
That math is certainly subject to scrutiny and discussion, and the PRO itself is not yet formed. No one can
Right.
say what the fees are. There's
Okay.
some creative math going on.
Probably and some literal things, so we're gonna try and find a way through this. I'm looking for the cannabis bills on the line. We haven't found Michelle.
Nicholas is on Zoom.
Okay, Mr. Sherman, I can give you about 3 minutes. I've got 10 minutes to get two bills out, so just tell us who you are, who you represent. We are looking at the financing part of this only. So let us know what you would like us to do.
Thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfectly.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Nick Shorman. I'm the Executive Director and a co-founder of Vermont NORML, and I'm going to keep this brief. I am here to testify in favor of adopting language that would replenish the Cannabis Business Development Fund into the future. The fund provides social equity applicants with the technical assistance needed to get their businesses going. As it stands now, there is a one-time allocation of $500,000 to that fund with no recurring appropriation to it. The target recipients of this fund are people in communities that have little to no business experience, who would greatly benefit from any assistance in navigating the complicated tax code, for example, that comes with growing / manufacturing a federally illegal but state legal product, cannabis. The Vermont Cannabis Control Board has acknowledged in its social equity report that it costs anywhere from $250,000 to $1 million to start a cannabis business. This is an unfeasible number to anyone, let alone someone who has been disproportionately harmed by cannabis prohibition, who may lack access to capital. Specifically, we are asking that you adopt language in S-127, Section 18, that states 20% of the fund raised by the excise tax be transferred to the Cannabis Business Development Fund. Currently, the state has allocated only $5,000 to each social equity business that has applied for the program to assist with a laundry list of business needs. This is not enough, and there needs to be an ongoing replenishment to this fund. In that same report, the CCB acknowledged that the Cannabis Business Development Fund is inadequately funded to provide meaningful economic opportunities to social equity applicants.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut you off because if we do this bill, if we don't get it out of here today, this bill will not go. So anything else you want in this bill will die. If I start playing with how the tax is allocated, I'm taking it away from where it's allocated now. So it's going to have impacts across the board. And at this point, I'm on economic development. I did not hear this come up in economic development. There is another $500,000 to replenish the business development fund. And that was discussed, but any ongoing isn't. And, you know, it's just too late in the game to make this kind of a change. Next year, there will be other cannabis housekeeping bills because it's a new field and we make changes every year. And next year, this might be a really good idea, but right now, it would send this bill back to appropriations. It would probably send it back to economic development, and it would be dead.
I understand.
Okay, so I apologize. This is just the end of the session. But we can take this up again. I'm sure there will be another bill coming soon.
Well, I appreciate you keeping this on your radar in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Michelle. All right, our thing in this bill is mostly just changing some things around. You have an amendment?
I do.
Okay.
And so I had walked you through all the money provisions last time.
Yep.
And I don't know whether or not there are any outstanding issues beyond. There's one with regard to the definitions of some tobacco definitions and
That was
cannabis.
Senator McDonald's issue, right?
Right, and I think it would be helpful because Brennan and I have been working with Jen in our office who handles tobacco taxes and Becky who handles the vape
commingled area.
The vape tax and the BAA, and Brent's been talking with BDH tax department and DLL about it stuff. So I think it would be good if you heard from Brent for just 5 minutes about the conversations, and then I can present the amendment to you.
Okay. Bryn, the floor is yours.
Okay, hello committee. Good to see you all. For the record, Bryn Hare, Executive Director of the Vermont Cannabis Control Board. So here to talk about the amendment that Michelle has drafted for H270. So I thought it would be helpful to start off this conversation just to give a little bit of context here for what this amendment is doing. So you might remember when Michelle did her walkthrough that the underlying bill in sections 22 and 23 addresses the sort of decoupling of cannabis and tobacco in order to address a couple of issues. So first would be removing the application of that 92% vape tax to cannabis products, including cannabis vaping devices. And second, to remove the overlapping jurisdiction of cannabis establishments by the Department of Liquor and Lottery and the Cannabis Control Board. So I'll start with the tax issue first. This committee probably remembers that in the Budget Adjustment Act, we amended the statute that governs the application of the tobacco taxes in order to explicitly exempt cannabis products. So that was already done in the BAA.
They have their own taxes.
Right. So my understanding of the intent of the legislature when they were creating that tobacco tax was that it was only contemplated to apply to tobacco products, tobacco vaping devices, and was not intended to sweep in cannabis vaping products, because cannabis products are prohibited from containing nicotine, and they also have their own set of taxes that apply to them. So that BAA language that exempted cannabis products didn't include the batteries that like attach to the cannabis vaping cartridges. So like the delivery device, the vaping delivery device. And given the really broad, like sort of sweeping definitions of tobacco products, tobacco substitutes, tobacco paraphernalia, it sort of remains unclear right now whether those cannabis vaping devices are subject to that 92% tax.
Can you get a, we're doing vaping, you can get a vape and you can plug different things into it. Can the same vaping device be used for both cannabis and tobacco?
So my understanding is that the way that the cannabis vapes work is that they have a specific design that is designed for cannabis vape cartridges.
Okay.
And that they
can't be cross-pollinated, so you can tell. I get really nervous about taxes that are based on use, and you leave some store clerk to figure out how you're going to use the vape. But if they are in effect different enough so that you can't commingle here.
Right, and that is sort of the intent of those changing those definitions. So that in the way that the underlying bill does, bill that you got from Senate Economic Development, it attempts to like decouple tobacco products from cannabis products. However, some stakeholders were concerned that given the number of statutes and the number of titles that you had to go through in order to untangle these definitions, that the decoupling that we did in the underlying bill remains unclear. So in order to address that, the board had several conversations, as Michelle mentioned, with the tax department, several attorneys at Ledge Council, and came up with a language that is here in your amendment that Michelle drafted. So section 23A amends the underlying definition of cannabis products. And remember, cannabis products are what have been specifically exempted from the application of the tobacco tax, so that it includes vaping devices. So any device designed to deliver cannabis into the body through inhalation of vapor that is sold at a cannabis establishment that's licensed pursuant to the CCB statutes, chapter 33 of Title 7. So that's the tax issue. The second issue is addressing the overlapping jurisdiction between the Department of Liquor and Lottery and the CCB. The department and CCB are in agreement that if a cannabis retailer would like to sell delivery devices for cannabis, like pipes or rolling papers, but they are not selling any tobacco products, then those retailers should not have to obtain also a tobacco license from DLL and be subject to DLL's jurisdiction, because eliminating that licensure requirement
would do a couple of things. It would streamline state resources, so there aren't two state agency, regulatory agencies overseeing these retailers. And it also eliminates the incentive of those retailers to obtain or to sell tobacco products. Because the idea is if they are required to obtain a tobacco license, just in order to sell pipes.
Stores sell both?
If a retailer does sell both,
Yes.
they have to be licensed by both.
By both, okay, this is just,
So
if
this
I've
would-
got a cannabis store, I don't have to have a tobacco license because you smoke it.
That's right. So if you have a cannabis retail license and you're not selling any tobacco products,
Right.
no vape, no tobacco vapes, no tobacco
So if
cigarettes.
you've got a smoke shop and you want to sell everything you smoke and you have to get both sets of licenses.
Okay, great. So, the second portion of the amendment is intended to make it abundantly clear that, so now we're in Title VII, the jurisdiction of DLL. So you are not required to obtain a license through DLL. If you are a cannabis retail establishment licensed by the board, engaged in the sale of cannabis products, but you are not engaged in the sale of tobacco products or tobacco substitutes, then you are not subject to DLL's jurisdiction. So underlying bill attempted to deal with this, some concern from stakeholders that it wasn't quite clear enough. All these amendments are designed to.
This to me is clear about vapes. Senator McDonald's question was a constituent that makes glass pipes. So it would depend, is that taxable? And
So my understanding about those devices are that they just are subject to the sales tax, the 6% sales tax. This would not change anything about the way those devices are taxed.
Now, this is a neighbor who says he's really treated as a tobacco paraphernalia. And he doesn't make it for tobacco.
Right.
Well, you might want to make it for tobacco. I think cannabis taxes might be higher.
Well, again, so the delivery device itself would only be subject to the tax that it's subject to now, which is the sales tax, and it would not be swept into.
So if he's selling it direct to the consumer, then it's a sales tax. If he's selling it to a store, depending on if the cannabis store sells a pipe, is that
Subject to the sales tax.
Not to the cannabis.
The cannabis tax only applies to what you have defined
Okay,
as cannabis and cannabis products.
okay. Same with tobacco. We did tax pipes. We don't know.
Now, my understanding from the tax department is pipes, rolling papers, things of that nature
Yeah.
are taxed with the sales tax.
As a sales tax, okay. Okay, committee. We have these as basically housekeeping, just putting up some of the questions. Are there any questions on this? Michelle, do you have anything?
Lynn just did my job for me, so I probably am not, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And the provisions that are in the Senate Economic Development Amendment that kind of partner with these two are sections 22 and 23. And what those are doing is that was what we referred to as the decoupling of cannabis and tobacco. So you took care of that one vape issue in BAA, but we wanted to just make it clear because it wasn't the General Assembly's intent when you created the new system. You wanted, just like the chair said, you wanted to have cannabis taxes and tobacco taxes separate. So the fact that people were reading into the definitions of tobacco substitute and other tobacco products to mean that it might capture tax, we just put a clear statement in there that says, we're not talking cannabis here. And then in the two amendments you have, like the 23A says something similar in the cannabis product statute, and then the 23B kind of belts and suspenders on licensing, which is like DLL, you're not to regulate these folks unless they're selling tobacco.
Question.
Just wanted to check, so you were mentioning economic development doing changes. I just wanted to I'm guessing that this is all integrated so that we don't have to worry that we're having anything cross-threading here, right? It's just inserts and it's fine.
Yeah,
Separate
you're
from-
adding sections 23A and B. Yep, and so we're just squeezing them in.
Right, just.
You're all set.
Since it's the crazy season, I'm asking a question.
Okay. If we're ready,
Yeah.
we
Senator
get a
McDonald,
motion.
Are you ready? And then H 270 with draft number 1.2. And it's, the timing date stamp is 5/4/23, 3:32 PM.
Is that the same as the one I have at 4:28?
Passed on another one, right before the meeting.
Right before the meeting? Okay, it's in the file. I'll go with his. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Further discussion. We move that we amend H 270 with draft 1.2.
1.2.
Okay. Further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. That.
Aye. Sorry, I'm late.
Okay, I've got that as 601. Okay, now I need a motion to approve as amended.
I would like to report favorably H 270 as so amended.
Okay, further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Say no. Also 601. We're on a roll committee. Thank you, Brett and Michelle. And now it's Tucker's turn. We have alcohol, which I've got to find in my file. Oh, I need a reporter. Who wants to report cannabis? You want to do it, Sandra? Okay.
If I don't, if I volunteer too much, I don't have it.
I think that's, isn't that your bailiwick, cannabis bills?
What's that?
Cannabis bills are your bailiwick.
Okay, we gotta do alcohol. We got the secretary staff and I'm 10 minutes late here. Tucker, come on up.
Break new ground.
Okay, I have the fiscal note.
We'll send you a little email.
Okay. So Tucker. Looking. I'm going to get this out of here in about 30 seconds. I have an amendment, right? Yes.
Yes, you do.
Okay.
So,
You
good
mentioned
afternoon.
that to us yesterday.
Tucker Anderson Legislative Council, to reorient you to what happened yesterday, you walked through the Senate Economic Development proposal, which is strike all. I highlighted where some of the permit numbers and scope are changing. I don't know if you heard from JFO. It seems like the impact is going to be de minimis. And you have a committee amendment to the Economic Development report. And that is largely a technical update to eliminate maximum number of permits from the list of fees for the fourth class license, because it was a unique subdivision in that section that listed the maximum number of permits within the fees.
This is trying to put it in plain English.
That is correct, so that everyone understands that it's $70 for each permit.
Okay. Is there further discussion? If not, I'd like a motion. I think somebody ought to, other than,
He does it so well.
just say so.
I don't have it in front of me, so I don't even know what to say.
It's 1.1.
I move to amend H 470 with draft number 1.1 dated 5/3/23 at 12:57 PM.
Okay. That's it. Further discussion. This is the plain English amendment. If, okay. Motion is to amend H 470 with draft 1.1. Further discussion. If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. I'm reading that as 601. Now I need a motion to approve as amended.
I move to approve as amended H47.
Thank you. Further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Very much.
Thank you all.
Carries 601. I need a reporter. You'll do that one? Okay. I caught Nolan on the way out the door and the word was de minimis. And I have to go across the hall now, because Jane's all alone. Senator Chittenden, and I think that's it. We didn't, oh, I was gonna try and get miscellaneous ag.
Yeah, and Good Joe said it might happen today or tomorrow. I'm just hanging out to see what
I've been
the
waiting.
dog
here for
people
Bobby.
haven't contacted Bobby.
They haven't? I
Yeah,
told
no.
them to contact, okay, then it's on them. We will vote it out tomorrow.
No, 472.
Okay, you've got what you need, they'll get you the